Hi, I'm Ron James in Washington, D.C. I'm standing in front of the White House. This is April 21st, 2009, the day after the press conference at the National Press Club regarding the X conference in Gaithersburg, Maryland. This is where folks like George Norrie, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, and Stephen Bassett came together to petition the Obama administration to finally disclose what the government knows about any extraterrestrial presence and involvement here on planet Earth. Now we're going to take a look at some of the highlights from the press conference at the National Press Club on April 20th.
After my Apollo flight, when I was back in the area and visiting relatives and friends, some of the people in the area who had been involved, what I call the old-timers, who were involved in the 1940s, 1947, and subsequent with the Roswell crash, and people like in the Sheriff's Department who had been to the crash site and were supervising traffic. My friend and friend of our family, the Major, who was an office mate of in the administrative function at Walker Air Force Base. These folks, because they had been shushed and told not to talk about their experience by military authority in those days, and on dire consequence if they did, felt that here in the 70s, many, many years later, that they didn't want to go to the grave with their story. They wanted to tell somebody reliable. And being a local boy and having been to the moon, they considered me reliable enough to whisper in my ear their particular story and their association with the Roswell crash, including the family of the undertaker who provided coffins for the alleged alien victims, and others on site who had been involved or knew the story. And of course, eventually I ran into Jesse Marcel Jr., the son of the Jesse Marcel, who was the first military officer on the site, and knew his story, and knew his story well, and we became friends in later years in this disclosure movement. And at some point, about 10 years ago, and I can't remember what date it was right now, when the disclosure movement was going strongly, I came here to Washington with a Navy commander by the name of Will Miller and Dr. Stephen Greer, and we were able to get an appointment at the Pentagon to talk about what we knew, or what we allegedly knew, what we thought we knew, and went and told our story. The powers that be at the Intelligence Committee of the Joint Chiefs of Staff listened to our story and said, the Admiral said, well, I don't know that story. I don't know that that's true, but I will find out. So we departed, went on our way, and subsequently learned through Dr. Greer and through Will Miller, and that those stories had been confirmed, and that the Admiral had been denied access when he tried to get into the inner workings of that process.
They were positioning us to make this intercept on this orbiting vehicle. Apparently, somebody made a decision to shoot him down before I even was launched. I didn't know that, but they finally gave us our final vector, and we went in there, and they said, be advised, you'll have a bogey 30 degrees at 15 miles on the port side. And sure enough, when I started painting it, I got this blob. It was not a blip, it was a blob. It was about the size you'd get of an aircraft carrier in the North Sea when you painted them. This was humongous for me. It was so strong that it literally, I didn't have to do anything to lock on except get the range gate marker near where the blip was. And boy, when it did, it just automatically, the lights went out, everything, and you had firing information already. And it was one of those things that just was a storybook flight. So I was going in, and at 20 seconds to go, on the lock-on, we start our final penetration to the fire. Now, the information we get from the radar says this guy was going fast at this time. He was going about maybe 100 knots faster than I was, and I was at Mach 0.92, which was all the F-86D could do. It's not like the modern jets. Well, sure enough, I started getting down there, ready to fire, and the circle started coming down, and the next thing I know, the overtake went from whatever it was, my speed, it was about 1,000 knots, something like that. So if he took off, I estimated about 10, Mach 10, in an airplane that doesn't go Mach 10. You know, airplanes don't go Mach 10. Not anything I've ever seen. And this was never made by a human being. This was something that was totally different. I've never seen. He could do things that I couldn't do. He could stop and start and keep going and everything else. But he took off. And he took off, and in 2 sweeps on the ground, he was off their scope. He was off my scope sooner than that. But as soon as that happened, the mission was over, and I couldn't fire.
And we've made some startling discoveries in the subject of alien abduction. Slide 1A in the press packet will show a picture of what one of these objects looks like. This is a T-shaped object, which is approximately a sonometer in each direction, covered with a very strange biological coating, a coating that is so strong that when the object is freshly removed, you can't cut through it with a surgical blade. The next slide is slide 1B. It shows another kind of an object that we removed, another metallic rod, which is also covered with a similar dark gray impervious membrane. And this material is also very strong, and you can't cut through it with a surgical blade. This is, within our technology, not possible. The majority of these objects, as I described, are these small metallic rods covered with this very strange biological coating. And quite recently, we found out that, I hope you're all sitting down, that this biological coating seems to be growing from the metallic structure within.
That those nanofibers could be carbon nanotubes. The correlation is pretty stark, actually, and so again, having something like carbon nanotubes or nanofibers in this sort of object, you don't find these things in nature. They have to be somehow processed, engineered, and they're not easy to make. So this speaks of possibly some kind of advanced engineering of crystals, perhaps for the use of either harvesting energy or creating some kind of resonator. The combination of all these things, if we go to the conclusions, the combination of all this data indicates some kind of unusual engineering within this object. And elemental analysis indicates it's likely non-terrestrial. It could be meteoric, possibly. It could be something else. The SEM and Raman analysis indicate carbon nanotubes in the object. To date, carbon nanotubes have not been found in meteorites. There's one meteorite that's been analyzed that showed some kind of carbon onion structures or something resembling buckyballs, but nobody's ever found anything resembling carbon nanostructures or threads or fibers. So this is unusual in itself. And of course, the electromagnetic emissions indicate possibility of a functional device that may serve to monitor or control.
Will Barack Obama be the disclosure president? A lot of people are hoping that this administration with Hillary Clinton and Panetta will finally come together and start the process of disclosing the information the United States government has been hiding for years about the extraterrestrial presence, beginning with Roswell, possibly before, and moving forward from there. I'm Ron James in Washington, D.C.